For this session, we're going to be talking with President Mason, who's the president of the University of District of Columbia, and President Walsh, who's the president of Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. Bennett Bells.
Do it well. Bennett Bells, do it well. Right. Yes.
Excited to talk to you today. We'd like to shift and we'd like to talk about financials, right? Financial barriers or issues at HBCUs right now. How has the pandemic heightened or brought attention to the problems that colleges, especially HBCUs, are facing right now?
It relates to the other conversations you had earlier. HBCUs are not all the same institution, but they have one thing in common, and that is that they generally have been denied access to wealth and the ability to accumulate wealth, which is sort of what has happened to Black people historically in America, because HBCUs are just institutional reflections of Black people. And so when you see the corona pandemic put a spotlight on the challenges that Black people already had for a very long period of time, it's not new, it's just that the COVID pandemic has brought those more into the surface. Same thing with HBCUs. While there are some exceptions to the rule, we're generally in the same boat, and the same challenges that Black people face are the challenges that institutions that serve Black people face.
Wow. Thank you. Anything you'd like to add to that, President Walsh?
No, I mean, I think that was perfectly stated. I think it also just highlights the need for us to make sure that we continue to position ourselves in ways that make us able to attract different kinds of resources. I think that that's one of the things that it's highlighted is we rely, those of us who are private institutions, we rely so heavily on tuition. And so when the enrollment is down or when there are shifts in the universe, it's really tricky if that's your main source of income. And so really it's, I think, highlighted further the importance of diversifying our income sources.
Wow. President Walsh, you are quoted in your commencement speech in 2017 at Johnson C. Smith that I'll paraphrase that colleges need to pivot to be more asset-based to support the needs of students. With the growing number of students at historically Black colleges being from low-income first-generation college homes, right now, what do you all need to do to make sure that you all are pivoting to make sure that these students get what they need to graduate and then enter the market successfully?
Well, so the pandemic to me is a great opportunity to think about the future and to think about the future for real as the 21st century, not the future as like next week, next year, next semester, but what do we mean by the 21st century? And so we're really trying to look quite deeply at what does it mean to be a woman of color who has attended a liberal arts institution that is preparing them for the 21st century. And so while there are subject matters that are important and we're all aware of, we all know the importance of STEM, there's a lot of other creative industries that are really critical as well. And so how do we make sure that we're positioning women of color to be leaders in those areas? The last thing I'll say about sort of the 21st century is I think the 21st century will belong to those who know how to work in an interdisciplinary way, who know how to span boundaries of race and gender and global locations. And so we're really trying to look at what does it mean? We're asking ourselves some very difficult questions right now. We don't have the answers yet, but we're asking ourselves hard questions.
Wow. What about you, President Mason?
Well, much the same. We're trying to prepare our students to be as successful as they can in the reality that they face. The name of our strategic plan is the equity imperative. But at some point you start to realize that, equity is just a word when you live in a country that is devoted to a system of white supremacy. I just read a book, Caste. If you haven't read it, I'd recommend it to you highly. But it basically talks about the fact that, we live in a race-based caste system in America, and the caste you're born into is likely the caste you're going to die in. Wow. And so, we enable our students to be the best they can with what we have to work with and what they have to confront. But at the end of the day, as a country, we really do have to rethink how we're educating our students, because we live in a system that actually suppresses and eliminates more talent than it produces. which is why all of our companies in America are complaining they can't find talent because they're committed to a system that destroys the talent that they need.
Wow.
Well, and if I could just add to that, one of the things that I came in last year talking about was that it's a VUCA environment. It's a term from the military, meaning volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So I said, that's where we are as a country. That's where we are as a college. And I think that especially for people of color, we have to think about how do we prepare them for that VUCA world outside of our institutions. And so one of the things that I've started to talk about is, especially for Black women, if you're going to be a leader in this environment with all of the craziness that we deal with on a daily basis, you have to make sure you are healthy and you have to be anti-fragile. So there's a lot of conversation about resilience and so forth, but I'm like, no, you have to be anti-fragile. Every time we get beat up, we have to get stronger because we otherwise are not going to make it. And so I think that we have an obligation to make sure that our students are prepared mentally, physically, spiritually to get into these leadership roles, because it is not an easy environment. I mean, the ability to be able to continue to withstand the racist attacks, you have to be ready for that. You have to be prepared because it's not only going to happen one time. And so that ability to stay healthy and anti-fragile, I think, is a really critical component of 21st century leadership.
Let me just add one other piece, which is, yes, we have to teach them to survive it. We have to strengthen them against it, but we also have to give them the tools and understanding they need to change it.
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, America can't be what it claims it wants to be unless we take on that issue.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow. Amazing. So at one point in this country, 75% of degrees that bachelor's degrees obtained by African Americans came from historically Black colleges and universities. How do we continue to build public awareness around the need to support HBCUs, especially during this time of COVID, but this national movement toward racial justice?
Well, the value has always been there, and we've produced beyond expectations historically and continue to do so. The question is really one of whether people appreciate that value and see it as of value as we move forward. You know, there's a big difference between tending to the wounded and charity work and doing what's necessary to make sure that students don't get wounded in the first place. And so as we move forward, at least, we're trying to help, as I said earlier, the business community, the philanthropic community understand that there's just a lot of talent out there, a lot of talent in these vast untapped reserves of Black and brown communities that we can figure out how to produce and educate. We just need a little help in getting it done.
I think part of our challenge right now is to be able to really clearly reclaim our space. Because what's happening is now that everybody has discovered Black folks, because we're in right now, and now that everybody's discovered us, every college and university has their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, and they're welcoming Black students, and they're giving safe space, and all of these things. And unfortunately, I think they're better at marketing that story. And so thinking about, I think at this moment in time, how do we collectively, as historically Black colleges and universities, say there is power in coming to our institutions. We were built for purpose. Like, we were built for you. This is not a hobby. This is not a like, ooh, it's trendy, we're going to do it. This is why we exist. And so I think we really have to work on telling our story, making a compelling case that that really can compete with what they're hearing at PWIs, because I really do think we've lost that story. We've lost that collective story. And one of the things that I know I'm challenged with is getting the right balance between talking about the importance of our history and where we come from and where we've been, but equally, we have to start talking about the future. What is the Black future in this country? Because again, what I think PWIs do quite effectively is they often say, and now let us tell you where you can go from here. So I think we have to marry our history and say, but why is that history important for where we're going and where you can go once you graduate from here? So this is an important moment for us. We have to reclaim this space.
That was good. But you know, the challenge is they like the glitter.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like black athletes. You know, how do you get them to come to your you know, athletic facility? And also, you know, there's less white students coming out right now. And so our students are revenue. And it's a really competitive environment. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. I think we have to make clear that we are a safe haven and a value added for the students that we serve. And we not only graduate, but we nurture and follow them for the rest of their lives in a hostile environment. And so,
that's right.
Look, I'm with you. Let's make the pitch.
I agree. Some of the best training I've ever received has been at a historically Black college. But most people don't know that about the foundings of HBCUs, that a lot of HBCUs are founded in the basement of churches, really big philanthropists and African Americans who cared about the educating of their offspring. What should those same groups do right now if HBCUs are going to weather the storm of COVID, but also the normal storms that they face on a normal setting? President Walsh.
Well, so Bennett College was founded in a church basement. St. Matthew's, we're a United Methodist affiliated institution. And I will say that while there were Black folks who were saving up their pennies to help us, Bennett College is named for a white man who gave a gift that allowed us to buy the land. And I say that because I think it's really amazing. Number one, you know, like, who is this white man giving money to Black folks? He was from Troy, New York, which is nowhere near here. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing giving money to these Black folks in North Carolina? And so there's something about white philanthropy is still needed. You know, it can't just be, it would be great if we could say we can just do this all, you know, in the family, but that's not going to happen. You know, I think it really takes a community of investments, but also the fact that the investment was in the land. And I bring that up because one of the things that I think we all struggle with right now is, while yes, it's great for philanthropists to have, again, discovered us and to say, oh yes, we're going to give dollars for scholarships. We love scholarship dollars. That is incredible and super supportive for our students. But we also need investments in capital, because we still need somebody who's willing to invest in the land, in the buildings, in the programs, and sort of general operating support. Again, we're, you know, United Methodist affiliated, and probably two of the most helpful investments we received this past year from the church were related to capital expenses, allowing us to work on some of the buildings, because they understood that we had to defer dollars that we had set aside for facility improvement. We had to use for students in an emergency for vacating campus and making the adjustments necessary there. So I say that because I think part of what has to happen is there has to be a continued interest from a variety of kinds of philanthropists, and it can't just be scholarships. It has to be an investment in the institution as a whole. So that's part of what we're really trying to talk more about. And as Bennett College, we're trying to move away from language, which is about saving us, to investing in us.
Perfect. President Mason?
Yeah, I really love listening to President Walsh and people like Mike Sorrell, because, you know, the enthusiasm and the ability to speak to today is something that I find very impressive. And I feel like at some point when I start talking, she's going to say, "Okay, boomer," and ask me to sort of move on, right? But and I say that to say this, you know, this is my third presidency, right? And I remember when I had that enthusiasm. And I remember when I was making those pitches. But at the end of the day, we always ran into that wall where you know, there was a place for us. And how dare we try to get out of that place? And so maybe we can change that, you know, and I want to do whatever I can as far as the benefit of my experience to help get that done, right? But you're right. You know, it's not just about scholarships. You know, it's about names on buildings, and it's about laboratories, and it's about the National Science Foundation giving the same research money to the same guys over and over and over again. I mean, it's a system that we're up against. And, you know, the irony of it is that, you know, HBCUs have really held America together until they could figure out how to get out of this bad business model. Wow. And we're still here, and we're still adding value in the process of trying to get out of this bad business model. If I could put in my words what President Walsh just said, is that, you know, we're trying to explain to them that it is a bad business model and that they need to figure out a way to find an enlightened self-interest so that what we do is seen as a value to what they need. And that's really what we're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. To the both of you, we'll start with President Mason. What about HBCU students and alumni? What can they do right now to help maintain the vibrancy and success of their institutions?
Well, you know, the first answer is, of course, get engaged and give more money. You know, the second answer is if you have networks, tie us to them in terms of jobs and so on. Then there's the politics of it. If you're a state institution, if there's one thing that our alumni are engaged in, it's the political arena. But then there's the other side, you know, understand where we are, who we are, and that we can't be everything to all people. And that once we agree on a plan, it's the team's plan, it's the institution's plan, it's everybody's plan. It's not, you know, the president's plan and everybody else trying to figure out what plan they want to implement. You know, I call it HBCU land, but, you know, it's the same. All universities are the same. The only difference is, when I was at Southern, LSU had the money to ride it out. Mm-hmm. You know, they could weather the stuff that pulls institutions apart. We don't have that luxury at HBCUs. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it's up to us presidents, young or old, to hold it together despite all of the pieces that are trying to pull it apart.
Mm-hmm.
President Walsh?
I love the connecting the network. And so I'm now officially a fan of President Mason. I just want to use this opportunity to express that. And I think it's the money, obviously. I mean, we're always in the top donors for our alumni giving. So love that. And we need to keep that up.
I think the number one right now, according to the research.
I mean, if you want to bring that up, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, really, really proud of that. And that shows a clear commitment of our alumni. And then what I think is really exciting is we're starting to see that opening up of the networks. Sharing their networks with us, making connections is absolutely essential. A few weeks ago, I hosted a Zoom check-in with all of the UNCF female presidents. And one of the presidents in our group talked about she is engaging her alums in tutoring. Wow. And I thought, oh, well, that's a really interesting idea. We haven't had that conversation yet, but I think what we're seeing is we're starting to see more and more institutions being quite creative about how we engage with our alums, because I think it's not been as creative and robust as it could be. So I think I love the network piece. So that's huge. Oh, and then maybe the last thing I'll say is we're starting to also work more with our alums to be part of events and part of really showcasing what they do. Because I think one of the things about Bennett is sometimes I say there's going to be a film, Hidden Figures 2, the Bennett College story, because our alums are so busy doing the work that they don't brag very much about it. And so one of the things that I've given them the assignment to do is to tell their post-Bennett story. They have to get better at bragging about what if they're not comfortable bragging about themselves, brag about their classmate. But one of the things that we see over and over again is Black women end up behind the scenes. We don't remember that they participated. Earlier I was mentioning the Woolworth sit-ins. 60% of Bennett Bells were arrested during those protests. And the work to organize and to sort of get ready for the planning, that happened on Bennett's campus, but Black women are not written into history in that way. So I think there's also an obligation for an HBCU focused on Black women to say, we also have to figure out how we lift them up as an institution and how they lift each other up. I think that's another important role.
Wow. Wow. Another question to the both of you, and we'll start with President Walsh. What about elected officials? What can they do right now to help set HBCUs up for success in the current world and a post-COVID world?
Well, I feel really lucky in North Carolina. We have a lot of our elected officials, both at the state level and the federal level, are very familiar with us. And I think that's, I feel spoiled. But I think what's really critical is also that they need to take the time to really understand and to hear us out. And we have plenty of opportunities in North Carolina to be able to do that, again, with our state officials as well as our federal officials. What I like is that we are increasingly, I think, being able to talk about our economic value to the state. And I think that's a piece that not all elected officials understand, is that we all are economic engines, not just because of our employees and their spending power in the community, but we also obviously graduate students who stay in the region. Thinking about us, though, as a contributor to the economy is really important. I think that's an important element as they think about further investments in HBCUs in North Carolina and around the country. I think it's really critical that they start to think of us as economic engines and not as a drain or not as an obligation, but as true partners. Maybe that's back to my, as President Mason said, maybe that's me and my optimism, but I think that that's a really critical role for them to consider us as a vital partner in.
Wow. President Mason?
Yeah. So the issue is not what we're doing, it's getting them to see what we're doing. I think
right.
That's the point, right? But for us, we're a little different because we're the only public university in the nation's capital. And so to really understand us, you have to look at us as sort of the state system for DC. We do workforce certification, we do associate's degrees, we do up to PhDs and law degrees. And 60% of our budget comes directly from the district.
Wow.
Now, we've had some challenges historically for a lot of reasons that are too complicated to get into here. But of late, because the district's budget has been so good, we've been actually getting budget increases every year. We're still underfunded by far, but it's better than it was yesterday. And if it hadn't been for COVID, I think it would have been better tomorrow than it was today. But the good news for us is that we have been investing in technology, and we have been certifying all our teachers to teach online. And so when the COVID issue came, we sort of just flipped. And because most of our students are commuters, and because a lot of the students that were going out of town are staying in town now, and because we're the least expensive school in the DMV, we're actually seeing an uptick in enrollment during this crisis. And so, you know, everybody's different, and we're just sort of different among differences. So we're lucky in a bad situation.
Thank you. I have one last question, and I want to fold maybe two questions in there. And just because the fact that President Mason, you have 20 years of experience being a college president at 3 different really great schools. And President Walsh, your entire career trajectory has been to support students on a journey to get to college, matriculate, and graduate. And you bring some unique experience to your role as a college president, and especially your time helping to support colleges, historically Black colleges around the country. So what does the future of HBCUs look like if we're able to come together and take collective action needed to overcome all these systematic barriers that affect Black people around this country and in some cases around the world? And what advice, this is the second part, what advice would you give your fellow college presidents as they continue to lift up the banner of historically Black colleges around this country? We'll start with you, President Walsh.
One of the things about the South and about HBCUs is it's what I said earlier, like we're very committed to our history, and we love that history. What I don't see, which is something that I think of as very sort of West Coast, is I don't see the same like absolute focus on the future. And I think that part of that is also, but like, look, that's a luxury to be able to think about the future. It's a luxury to be able to daydream about the future. But if you really think about Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X or Shirley Chisholm, the people who have been able to create a narrative that we all look back on and we say we believe in that, at their time, they were the futurists of their time. They were the Afrofuturists of their day. They were talking about a future that didn't exist, nobody had thought of. And so now we're nostalgic about them, but who are our Afrofuturists today? Black Panther is Afrofuturism, or it's really African futurism, more, centered on the continent. But sometimes I say that I think Bennett College has the ability to at some point operate at the intersection of Wakanda and Hogwarts. And when I say that, students say, oh yeah, well, I'm Ravenclaw, because they know their Hogwarts houses and they know their Wakanda. And so I say all of that to say, I don't know quite yet, because I haven't even had the full luxury in this role to say, what the heck does the future look like? But increasingly, that's what I'm starting to think about. I'm starting to try to envision, what is the absolute future? How do we have a future that has Black people at the center of creating their own future, at the center of us leading, at the center of the leadership of the globe? I'm still working on how to describe that in a way that brings others along, but that's what I'm wrestling with these days. And then what advice do I have? I'm still in the advice taking role right now. So I'm not sure that I have advice.
I don't know if I fully accept that final answer, so I'll let you think on that one. But I'll go to you, President Mason.
So on an individual basis, I would say that depends on the HBCU. My guess is we will lose some, but that's true of higher education in general. It's an industry that's sort of reshaping itself and trying to figure itself out as we speak. Second, though, I'm going to go back to something President Walsh said, and I'm hoping that certain people are listening when I say this. You know what the Thurgood Marshall College Fund is, the State Institution Association. You know what UNCF is, but before that there was NAFIO, which is supposed to be the organization, the umbrella organization. I've been for years trying to get NAFIO to change its name to the National Association of Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Because I think as a group, we need a voice and a presence at the national level, and you got to claim this, you got to be the space to claim the space, right? So there's that. Now in terms of the future, we say we're in the future business. I mean, that's what education is, right? But we say the future is really what you do today. And so, every day we focus on today because yesterday is just a memory and tomorrow is just a vision. It's what you do with today that will define yesterday and tomorrow, right? And then finally, in terms of the dream and the vision, I'm focused squarely on this idea that we call America, because it's still an idea and it's still an experiment that may or may not prove to be possible. And this upcoming election in 2020 is going to have a lot to say about it, right? But this notion that all people are created equal and that all talent is created equal and that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed is a vision that I hold on to and that I hold America accountable for. And when I talk to these business people and talk to these philanthropists, I ask them, do they agree with and see the same vision?
Wow. Thank you for that. When I think about American history, I think about HBCUs, because if you were to erase HBCUs from our history, you would erase some of the people who have helped to build America in the American history. And so I am thankful each and every day for those very forward-thinking people who stood up in the basement of churches and said, let's found this school so our kids can go there. And so thank you for your time today, but more importantly, thank you for leading institutions that are helping to create American history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.